Homeless black girl won the heart of the millionaire rejected by his wife on Valentine's Day. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The headlights of passing cars flickered across the pavement, casting fleeting silhouettes on the silent city sidewalk. It was a cold, drizzly February evening, one of those nights where the wind seemed determined to remind you of every mistake, every regret. Beside a shuttered bakery, a young black girl sat with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest as she tried to protect herself from the damp chill. Her worn-out blanket offered little warmth, and the hood of her threadbare sweatshirt was soaked through. Despite her precarious situation, her eyes held a resolve that refused to be drowned out by the gloom. Just a few blocks away, the rhythmic chime of an ornate grandfather clock marked 8:13 p.m. Inside a lavish penthouse, perched at the top floor of a glass tower, Richard Whittaker leaned against his marble kitchen island, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey. He was a tall man in his early 30s with perfectly combed hair and a regal posture. Tonight he stood there alone, dressed in a tailored suit that now felt oddly out of place. The living room behind him was decorated with red roses and heart-shaped balloons, a painfully ironic reminder that this was, after all, Valentine's Day. But the silence echoed more loudly than any declaration of love could. On the smooth granite countertop lay an untouched dinner for two. Richard had planned it all. A private chef, thousands of rose petals shipped from abroad, a special gift box containing a necklace studded with tiny rubies. It was meant to be a grand romantic gesture for his wife, Andrea, the one he had pursued for years. But earlier that evening, Andrea had sent a curt message. "Don't wait for me. I won't be back." He read those words again and again until the letters blurred, the final punctuation mark hitting him harder than any physical blow ever could. Now, with a single swirl of his whiskey, he recalled the day he first met Andrea in business school. She had been poised and sophisticated, capturing everyone's attention, including his. At the time, he was fresh-faced, excited to learn the world of finance, and hungry to make his fortune. Andrea was from an already privileged background. Their union had been as much a merger of families as it was any semblance of love. Over the years, that thin veneer of affection had faded into something cold and transactional. He saw it, but he never imagined it would unravel so completely, especially on Valentine's Day. He cast one final look at the lavish table setting, the pink champagne on ice, the flickering tea lights. Then he stepped out into the cold, seeking air and solitude. A private elevator took him straight to the ground floor, depositing him into the quiet hush of the city streets. A light drizzle danced under the glow of dim street lamps as he walked aimlessly through the late-night hush. There were no real plans, just the desire to be anywhere but that empty penthouse, haunted by abandoned romance. He passed countless storefronts, a florist locking up for the night, a pastry shop with heart-shaped cakes in the window. Valentine's Day promotions were plastered everywhere, mocking him with their bright pinks and reds. As he turned a corner, an unexpected sight stopped him in his tracks. A young black girl, homeless, perched on the sidewalk. The overhead neon sign from a nearby diner illuminated her face, highlighting the faint worry lines across her brow. Her hair, gathered under her hood, seemed damp, and her slender hands were clasped around her knees, as if hugging herself to conserve warmth. Richard paused, glancing around. The streets were nearly deserted, the few pedestrians hurrying by without a second glance. The girl's small backpack lay beside her, its contents stuffed to the brim, her entire life reduced to a single bag. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting a subtle mix of weariness and dignity. No words were spoken, yet something in that moment, something intangible, stirred a feeling in Richard he had not experienced in years. He reached into his coat pocket, fishing for his wallet. Usually he was quick to hand out a few bills to ease his conscience before moving on. This time his heart pounded with a peculiar ache. Why does this feel different, he wondered. As he extended a folded note, the girl hesitated, her pride clashing with the urgent reality of her situation. "No need," she said softly, voice calm though her lips trembled from the cold. I'm fine." He noticed the dryness in her throat, heard the quiet lie in her words. "Please," he insisted gently. "It's cold. You shouldn't be out here tonight." His mind shifted to Andrea's rejection, the emptiness of his elaborate Valentine's surprise. He thought of his own heartbreak and realized how privileged he was to even call it heartbreak, compared to someone who was out on the street with almost nothing. That perspective felt like a punch to his chest. The girl, wary, finally accepted the small sum, but Richard sensed she was uncomfortable. The drizzle intensified, and a wave of compassion, genuine compassion, washed over him. He scanned the nearby blocks. The diner was about to close. No other shelter seemed open at this late hour. In the distance, a few vacant doorways offered meager cover from the rain, but nowhere near enough comfort for someone shivering on Valentine's night. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone respectful, not wanting to pry but also unable to walk away. She pressed her lips together, as if considering whether to reply. Finally, she said, "Olivia." A wave of relief and gratitude swept over him that she had at least shared her name. He nodded quietly. "I'm Richard." A single car rumbled by, headlights briefly illuminating the raindrops swirling around them. Richard stood there awkwardly, reflecting on a life so drastically different from Olivia's. He had just come from the pinnacle of comfort, a penthouse dotted with the world's luxuries, and she was out here, hugging herself against the midnight chill. "Is there a shelter I can call for you?" he ventured. "Or maybe a family member you can stay with tonight?" She shook her head. "Not tonight," she answered simply, avoiding any details that might lay her vulnerability bare. "But I'll be okay." The tightness in Richard's chest only deepened. Perhaps it was the heartbreak inflicted by Andrea's message that made him more open to empathy. Perhaps it was the childlike innocence still flickering in Olivia's eyes despite her ordeal. Whatever the reason, an unfamiliar impulse took root in him. He wanted to do more than drop money and walk away. Just then, from a nearby alley, a trio of rowdy bystanders spilled out, half-drunk and boisterous. They stumbled past Olivia, one of them pausing to throw a condescending comment her way, calling her worthless. The cruelty rattled Richard. Before he realized it, he had stepped forward, placing himself protectively between Olivia and the group. His suit jacket was quickly drenched by the driving rain, but he didn't care. "Show some decency," he snapped, voice low but steady. The men moved on, laughing mockingly but apparently sensing that picking a fight wasn't worth the trouble. Olivia simply watched, eyes flickering with uncertainty. Richard, adrenaline still surging, turned back to her. "Let me at least find you a hot meal," he said, gesturing to the diner sign that still flickered a few yards away. "We can figure out something else after that. I don't feel right leaving you alone in this weather." The neon sign buzzed overhead as the diner's manager hovered by the glass door, looking prepared to lock up at any minute. One final time, Olivia studied Richard's face, searching for hidden motives. Something about the quiet sincerity in his eyes must have convinced her. She nodded. "Okay, thank you." As they walked toward the diner together, Richard felt an odd sense of calm settle into his chest. Just minutes ago, he had been wandering the streets, consumed by heartbreak and betrayal. Yet in the presence of this stranger, homeless, cold, and carrying silent burdens, he felt a glimmer of purpose. Perhaps in offering help on this lonely Valentine's night, he was finding a fragment of redemption for himself. The sky continued its relentless drizzle, the city's lights reflecting on the slick pavement like shards of broken mirrors. Olivia stepped inside the diner's warm interior, blinking at the sudden brightness. Richard held the door for her, an unexpected feeling of hope taking shape in the corner of his heart. unaware of how deeply this chance meeting would transform both of their lives. A soft bell chimed above the diner door as Richard held it open for Olivia. The place was nearly empty at this late hour, and the waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, looked up from wiping down the counter. Something in her gaze flickered with fleeting concern when she noticed Olivia's damp clothes and shivering posture. "Kitchen's closing soon," she said, tossing the cloth aside. Then, glancing at Richard's expensive suit and Olivia's drenched hoodie, she arched an eyebrow. The pairing must have seemed unusual. Richard nodded, stepping forward with a polite, if somewhat forced, smile. "We won't take long. Just a warm meal and maybe some coffee." The waitress, her name tag read Susie, hesitated for a heartbeat. Perhaps she had witnessed too many late-night dramas in her years at the diner. But something about Richard's steady tone, or maybe the subdued look in Olivia's eyes, convinced her to oblige. She grabbed a pair of laminated menus from a nearby rack. "Sit wherever," she said, her guarded expression softening a fraction. The diner's interior had a classic feel, faded red booths, a long chrome counter, and a jukebox in the corner that seemed out of place in the digital age. Yellowed newspaper clippings and pictures of the diner's history hung crookedly on the walls, testifying to a past era when these neon-lit counters bustled with round-the-clock patrons. Tonight, though, only a lone trucker sat hunched over his coffee at one end, and two teenage cooks cleaned up behind the pass-through window at the other. Richard guided Olivia to a corner booth, away from the glaring fluorescent lights. As they settled across from each other, he noticed the fatigue etched into her face. The overhead lamps revealed the faint circles under her eyes, and her posture, although proud, indicated days, maybe weeks, of sleeping on concrete. She glanced around nervously, as if accustomed to being asked to leave at any moment. "You can relax here," Richard said gently, noticing her anxious scanning. "No one's going to make you leave." He motioned toward Susie, who was approaching with a pot of coffee. Olivia didn't reply right away. Instead, she peered at the laminated menu, turning it over with delicate hands. It was clear she was choosing her next words carefully. "Thank you," she said at last, barely lifting her gaze. "You really didn't have to do this." Susie reached the booth, steaming coffee pot in hand. She tilted it toward Richard's empty mug first, then hovered over Olivia's side. "Coffee?" she asked. Olivia nodded slightly, letting Susie fill up the chipped porcelain cup. The warmth of the steam rose instantly, bringing a little color back to her cheeks. "So what'll it be?" Susie asked, flipping open her notepad with the well-practiced flourish of someone who had done this job for decades. Richard looked at Olivia. Her eyes darted over the short menu, burgers, sandwiches, a few breakfast items. "Maybe something hot," she said softly, and then, before she could second-guess it, added, "Tomato soup and a grilled cheese, please." Susie scribbled it down without judgment, then turned to Richard. He blinked, realizing he hadn't even glanced at the menu. Truthfully, he wasn't hungry. An odd numbness had settled over him ever since that text from Andrea. But to make Olivia more at ease, he ordered a bowl of chili and a slice of apple pie. Susie jotted it all quickly, offered a nod, and retreated behind the counter where the teenage cooks still bustled about. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was broken only by the hushed clinks of utensils from behind the counter and the persistent hum of an overhead fluorescent tube. Richard traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger, trying to figure out the best way to start any kind of conversation. He glanced at the window, where cold raindrops continued their relentless tap dance against the glass. Outside, the city looked a little emptier than usual, drained by the lateness of the hour and the gloom of the weather. He cleared his throat. "You said your name is Olivia. That's a beautiful name." She nodded a small thanks, her face partially hidden behind the curtain of her hoodie. The seat's vinyl made a squeaking noise as she shifted. "It means olive tree, I think," she added quietly. as if offering a random fact to fill the space. Richard smiled a little. Fitting, maybe. Olive branches are symbols of peace and resilience, right? He paused. You look like someone who's had to be pretty resilient. She tightened her grip around her coffee mug, letting its warmth seep into her fingertips. After a hesitant moment, she said, I'm trying. They fell silent again, yet the hush between them felt somewhat less strained. Richard realized he was treading on delicate ground, and part of him was stunned at how invested he was becoming in the well-being of a complete stranger. But another part of him recognized that, in focusing on her situation, he was able to momentarily escape his own heartbreak. Where are you staying tonight? He asked gently, not wanting to push but also concerned about the reality that she had nowhere safe to go. Olivia's eyes darted down to the table. Usually, wherever I can find a spot that's sheltered from the rain, she admitted. Bus stations, sometimes. Emergency shelters are often full, or they have lines. A heaviness weighed on Richard's chest. He'd always known such hardship existed. He'd donated to charities, attended fundraisers. Yet it was different, seeing that harshness reflected in someone's face in the shape of a young woman who should have been protected by society rather than left to fend for herself. Susie returned, balancing 2 plates and a bowl of soup on her forearm with the skill of a seasoned pro. She slid the dishes onto the booth's table with a quick, motherly precision. Olivia lowered her eyes at the steaming soup, her stomach apparently growling enough to betray her. She picked up the spoon but paused, as if embarrassed to eat in front of him. Dig in, Richard said softly, giving her an encouraging nod. Don't worry about a thing. She tasted the tomato soup, her posture relaxing with each warm spoonful. Richard took a spoonful of his chili, but his mind was elsewhere, swirling with 1,000 questions he dared not ask all at once. He studied Olivia's features. Her cheeks were rounding with color again, and in the brief moment when her eyes flicked up from her food, he caught a glimpse of someone strong, someone who refused to be defined by her circumstances. Time felt strangely suspended inside the diner's fluorescence, the windows now streaked with rivulets of rain that blurred the city beyond. The trucker at the far end finished his coffee and left with a polite nod to Susie, who locked the door behind him, flipping the sign to closed. It was clear she was allowing Richard and Olivia a bit more time to finish. Richard mustered the courage to speak again. Olivia, He paused, choosing his words. I don't want to pry, but I'd like to help if I can. Even if it's just for tonight, I've got the space and, well, it's not safe out there for you, especially in this weather. She froze, spoon halfway to her lips. A swirl of conflicting emotions passed over her face, surprise, pride, caution, and, beneath it all, a flicker of hope. She placed her spoon down, the clink against the ceramic louder than either of them expected. Why? She asked, voice trembling slightly. Why do you even care? He opened his mouth to answer, then hesitated, realizing that was an excellent question. A question he himself didn't fully have the words for. I care because I know what it's like to be alone on a night when everyone else seems to have someone, he finally answered, sincere. And maybe I need a little hope too. She studied him intently, as though trying to read the honesty in his words. The mention of hope must have resonated because her gaze softened, but she still seemed torn. Blinking back tears she refused to let fall. A stranger offering to let me crash at his place. That's not something I can just accept without hesitation. Richard nodded, fully understanding. Of course. I can't blame you. We could find another arrangement, a motel, or I can drive you to a 24-hour shelter, whatever you feel safer with. He took a breath. I just want you to know there are options, that you don't have to face the streets alone tonight. Outside, the wind rattled the diner's front door, and thunder echoed faintly in the distance. Olivia shivered at the sound, as if reminded of the unwelcoming city waiting beyond these neon-lit walls. She reached for the last bite of her grilled cheese, stalling perhaps, or truly weighing her risk in the face of his offer. After a tense moment, she exhaled, an air of resignation mingling with a growing trust she seemed reluctant to acknowledge. "A motel might be best," she said quietly, flicking her gaze from him to the near-empty coffee cup. "At least for now." Richard offered a small nod, feeling a curious mix of relief and disappointment. He realized he'd been half hoping she'd trust him enough to accept lodging in his penthouse, a penthouse that felt increasingly suffocating whenever he was there alone. But he also recognized how outlandish and frightening that suggestion might seem to someone in her situation. "Then it's settled," he said, mustering a gentle smile. "We'll find a place for you tonight. After that, we'll see." Susie appeared once more, dropping off the check with a subtle, knowing glance. Perhaps she'd seen countless stories in her diner, some hopeful, some tragic. In that moment, Richard wasn't entirely sure which this one would become. But as he rose to pay, he couldn't help feeling that a doorway had been cracked open between two different worlds. Olivia stood, gathering her small backpack from the floor. Richard led the way to the register where he settled the bill without fanfare. After Susie returned his card, she shot Olivia a faint, encouraging smile, a rare gesture from someone clearly hardened by the late-night grind. Olivia returned it with a polite nod, that dignity in her eyes shining through even now. When they stepped back outside, the rain had intensified into a downpour, each droplet slanting sideways with the wind. Richard hurried to open his umbrella, although it did little to fully shield them. Pulling his coat snug, he gestured toward where his parked car awaited around the corner. Olivia pressed her lips together and followed, the neon sign of the diner behind them flickering once, then going dark. They walked in silence, water splashing up around their ankles. Richard's mind ticked over the steps he'd need to take: drive her to a decent motel, pay for a few nights' stay, at least secure a place for her to rest in safety. But deep down, he felt the stirrings of a question. Was that enough? Would a couple nights under a motel roof solve anything for her in the long run? He wasn't sure, and for the first time in years he felt that the fortune he'd amassed might actually serve a purpose beyond profit margins and business expansions. As they rounded the corner, Richard wondered whether Valentine's Day might mean something entirely different now, for both of them. Not a day of broken promises, but the start of an unexpected bond, one that neither could have predicted when the evening began. Thunder rolled through the night sky, rumbling low and steady, as Richard hurriedly unlocked his luxury sedan with a click of the key fob. The streetlights above them glimmered off the rain-streaked windshield, and heavy droplets pinged against the metal roof. Pulling open the passenger door, he motioned for Olivia to slip inside first. She hesitated only for a heartbeat before taking the seat, clutching her backpack in her lap. Richard settled behind the wheel, shoving aside a pile of unopened mail in the passenger footwell, mostly glossy event invitations and real estate flyers. One read, "Valentine's Gala. You are cordially invited." He tore his gaze away, focusing on the moment at hand. When the engine purred to life, he turned the heater on full blast, hoping to help Olivia dry off even a fraction. The city lights flickered past as he steered onto the main road, tires splashing through puddles. For several blocks, neither of them spoke. The interior of the car glowed faintly from the dashboard, illuminating Olivia's thoughtful expression. Richard caught glimpses of her in the rearview mirror, noting how she tightened her grip on her backpack whenever the car lurched over a bump. At a red light, Richard glanced over. "Is there a particular motel you prefer? Sometimes the ones on the east side have vacancies this late." She shrugged, hair still damp against her hoodie. "I don't know any by name. Usually I just see who'll accept cash and not ask too many questions." He nodded, a weight settling in his chest as he realized how much of her life revolved around surviving day by day, hour by hour. "All right. I know a place that's not too run down. Should be okay for the night." He paused, considering adding my treat, but decided not to voice it so directly. Olivia had already shown she disliked feeling pitied. As they drove on, the windshield wipers thumped in syncopated rhythm, pushing aside relentless sheets of rain. A sense of surreal calm settled over Richard. Just hours ago, he'd been pacing his penthouse, reeling from Andrea's blunt message, feeling more alone than he ever had. Now, a quiet conviction took hold. I can do something good here, even if it's small. He turned onto a quieter street that led toward the city's outskirts. Neon signs from budget motels dotted the roadside, some blinking tiredly through the downpour. Vacancy, free cable, low weekly rates. Each sign in its own way beckoned to the weary and desperate. "This one's not too bad," he murmured, pointing out a modest building whose sign flickered Maple Inn. The parking lot sported a handful of tired vehicles. A thin, fluorescent light illuminated the front office window. "I've seen security patrolling here sometimes. Better than most places on this stretch." Olivia swallowed, adjusting her backpack. "Thanks," she said. "It's been a long time since anyone offered me more than a quick handout," or she broke off, eyes drifting to the rainfall beyond the passenger window. Richard eased the car to a stop near the front office, engine idling. "We'll get a room for you, all right? A night or two. Give you a break from the rain." Her shoulders stiffened slightly. "If it's okay, can we just do tonight for now?" He recognized her apprehension. Perhaps she feared strings attached, or maybe she didn't want to feel indebted. In truth, he understood. Trust wasn't built overnight. "Of course," he said, voice kept soft. They both stepped out into the rain, hunching against the downpour as they hurried to the motel office. A faint smell of stale coffee and disinfectant wafted out when Richard pulled open the door. Behind the front desk, a middle-aged man with a thinning hairline was half asleep over a small TV set. He startled awake when he heard them turning the volume down on some late-night infomercial. "Evening," he greeted them, eyeing Olivia's soaked hoodie and Richard's tailored suit. He snatched a clipboard from the desk. "Need a room?" "Yes, please," Richard replied, stepping forward. "Just for one night. 2 beds or one?" The manager's tone was mechanical, but a flicker of mild judgment registered in his eyes as he looked from Richard to Olivia. Richard opened his mouth, about to say 1 bed was fine, then realized how wildly inappropriate that would sound. 2, actually, he corrected firmly. 2 beds. He slid his credit card across the counter. The manager swiped it and handed over a form to sign. Olivia remained near the door, arms folded tightly, as if still poised to flee at the first hint of trouble. After receiving the keys, Richard passed them to her. The plastic key ring read Room 214 in faded gold lettering. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice more formal than before. Thank you." The manager muttered, "Enjoy your stay," though his words carried no particular warmth. He returned to his TV set, flipping channels with a bored air. Outside, the rain had lessened to a steady patter as they walked along the row of doors under a metal awning. Dim yellow bulbs buzzed overhead. They found room 214 on the 2nd level, the chipped door marked by peeling paint around the numbers. Olivia inserted the key, jiggling it for a moment before the lock gave way. The room was predictably utilitarian. 2 small beds, a dresser with a dated TV, a worn-out carpet that bore the unmistakable scent of old smoke, despite the no-smoking sign. A single window overlooked the parking lot and the neon motel sign, whose buzz faintly penetrated the thin walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dry, and there were clean towels folded on a tiny table by the bathroom door. Olivia hovered by the entry, unsure whether to step in first. Richard stayed back, not wanting to crowd her. "I'll give you some space," he said gently. "I can come back in the morning if—" The door suddenly slammed shut, startling them both. A gust of wind from the open window had pushed it closed. Olivia jumped, then exhaled a shaky breath, steadying herself. Her nerves were frayed, and Richard realized any sudden noise might rattle someone who had spent too many nights in uncertain places. "Everything's all right," he reassured, pushing the door open again to keep it from latching behind them. He noticed her hand tremble against the key. "I'm going to head out and let you rest," he continued calmly. "But if you need anything at all, here's my number." He pulled out a business card from his wallet. Normally these cards were reserved for high-profile clients or corporate contacts. Now it felt oddly personal to hand it over. He scribbled his personal cell on the back with a ballpoint pen from the nightstand. Olivia accepted it, her gaze drifting over the embossed text that read, "Richard Whittaker, Whittaker Holdings." She read it like she was trying to piece together who he really was. Then, folding it gently, she slid it into the front pocket of her backpack. "Thank you again," she managed, "for everything." He forced a small smile. "Get warm, get some rest. I'll pay for tonight. Maybe tomorrow we can figure out what comes next, okay?" He paused, wanting to say something more comforting, but the right words eluded him. "Promise me you'll lock the door behind me?" Her lips twitched in a semblance of a smile. "I promise." With that, he stepped into the corridor, pulling the door closed. Sure enough, he heard the lock click from the inside, a tiny sound that eased him, knowing she'd be safe for at least this one night. Drained, he took a moment to lean against the railing, eyes on the dark puddles in the parking lot below. His reflections drifted between Andrea's text and Olivia's trembling gratitude, swirling into a blur of confusion and renewed purpose. What had started as a disastrous Valentine's Day for Richard had transformed into something he still couldn't name, an unspoken bond, a sense of responsibility, or maybe just simple human decency thrust into the forefront of his life. He inhaled the humid night air, letting the neon motel sign buzz in his ears. Finally, he descended the metal staircase to his car. The storm clouds overhead began to break, faint moonlight shining through. Sitting behind the wheel, he took one last glance up at the second-floor windows, though he couldn't tell which light was hers. Then he started the engine, pulling out of the lot with a gentle rush of tires against wet pavement. He told himself he would come back in the morning to check on her. Yet, as he drove away, a nagging thought pressed into his mind. What if she's gone? But he shook it off. After all, you couldn't force someone to let you help them. You could only offer and hope they trusted you enough to accept. In the rearview mirror, the motel's neon sign grew smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by the darkness of the city streets. Another thrum of thunder pulsed in the distance, yet the worst of the storm had passed, or so it seemed. For Richard, though, a greater storm churned inside, spurring him to reconsider the priorities of his carefully crafted world and the unexpected promise he'd made to a girl named Olivia. A dull morning sun pressed against the ragged skyline, half obscured by low clouds that threatened more rain. Richard woke earlier than usual, eyes gritty with exhaustion, feeling an inexplicable urgency to return to the Maple Inn. The memory of Olivia's tired face refused to leave him. It was as if, in the quiet hours after the storm, her vulnerability had etched itself into his conscience. He gave up on trying to sleep in his empty penthouse. Andrea's final text still lingered in his phone, an all-too-casual "I won't be back" that was now nearly 24 hours old. The expansive living room, with its panoramic windows, looked hollow in the pale daylight. The rose petals he'd strewn across the marble floor were wilted, their once vibrant color drained by time and heartbreak. He didn't bother cleaning them up. Instead, he tossed on a casual jacket, grabbed his car keys, and headed straight for the elevator. The city bustled with early commuters, traffic signals blinked in the usual morning cycle, and the rush of tires on wet asphalt provided a static hum beneath the everyday chatter of horns. Richard navigated through it mechanically, mind circling back to Olivia. Would she have stayed the night? He wondered. Or would fear of being indebted, fear of trusting, drive her back onto the street? He reached the Maple Inn parking lot in about 20 minutes, the sign's neon lights now switched off in the weak daylight. A single housekeeping cart stood outside one of the ground-floor rooms. Otherwise, the place seemed quiet, with most guests either asleep or gone to work. A light drizzle started up again as he parked his car. He gazed at the second floor, scanning for signs of activity in room 214. He climbed the same metal steps he'd descended hours ago, each footstep clanging against rusted metal. A swirl of damp air carried the faint smell of cleaning solvents from the open door of a nearby room. The walkway felt narrower in the daytime, stripped of the mystique the night had offered. He paused in front of the closed door. For a moment he was uncertain. Should he knock? Would that seem invasive? Still, he raised his knuckles to the wood, tapping gently. Seconds passed, but there was no sound from within. He rapped a bit louder, heart quickening with each unanswered second. Just as he was about to step away, the door cracked open, chains still latched. Through the gap, he saw Olivia's eyes, cautious and slightly red, like she'd hardly slept either. "Hi," he said softly, relieved that she was still there. "It's me. Richard." She blinked, then unlatched the chain, opening the door a bit wider. Her hair was in slight disarray, and the black hoodie from the night before was now zipped up over a rumpled t-shirt. She still clutched that small backpack, though with less desperation than the previous evening. He caught a glimpse of the modest motel room behind her, beds slightly unkempt, the blinds pulled shut against the dull morning light. "Morning," Olivia managed, stepping aside to let him in. Her voice carried the tentative politeness of someone not used to guests or early calls. Richard entered quietly, noticing the stale smell of leftover fast food containers she must have picked up from a vending machine or hotel kiosk. A sense of relief washed through him. She hadn't run off in the dead of night. I wanted to see if you were okay," he explained, offering a quick, somewhat awkward smile. "Did you sleep at all?" She shrugged, her expression an uneasy mixture of gratitude and wariness. "A bit," she said, glancing at the clock on the nightstand. It read 8:42 a.m. It was weird, having an actual bed again. My back kept expecting cold concrete. Her openness tugged at Richard's heartstrings. I'm sorry about that," he said. Then he realized how empty those words sounded. Sorry for what? Sorry that the world had been cruel, or that he had only come along so late? He cleared his throat. "Listen, how about I get you something to eat? A proper breakfast. The diner last night was about to close, so maybe we can do better now." Olivia shifted from one foot to the other, glancing at the rumpled bed behind her. "We can do that," she allowed. "Just give me a minute." She gestured vaguely, implying she wanted to freshen up before going anywhere. He nodded and turned toward the door, sensing she would prefer privacy. "I'll wait in the car," he said. "Take your time." "Okay," came her soft reply. Minutes later, he found himself leaning against his sedan, fidgeting with his phone. Another message from Andrea blinked on the screen, but it was a pre-scheduled appointment reminder for couples counseling. "Cancelled," she must have typed. "No further sessions." He sighed, pocketing the device with a knot in his gut. A mixture of guilt and liberation warred inside him. Focus on the present moment, he told himself. Olivia emerged from the second-floor walkway soon after, shoulders still tense but hair combed back. She wore the same jeans as last night, and the hoodie was the only layer she had. But something about her posture suggested she was trying to regain a sense of dignity despite her circumstances. As they got into the sedan, Richard noticed a faint bruise on her wrist, partially hidden by the hoodie's sleeve. He decided not to ask about it just yet. She'd share if she wanted to. They set off. Without discussing it, Richard drove downtown until they found a small corner cafe that wasn't too crowded. It had an awning that sheltered them from the drizzle, and chalkboard signs out front advertising fresh croissants and cappuccinos. Olivia looked hesitant, but followed him inside, drawn by the aroma of warm bread. The cafe's interior was cozy, mahogany tables, large windows overlooking the damp street, and a playlist of acoustic guitar music drifting from speakers overhead. A barista greeted them with a bright, rehearsed smile, directing them to pick any table. They chose a quiet corner by the window where they removed their jackets and settled in. Richard ordered a cappuccino and an omelet, glancing at Olivia for her choice. She stared at the menu, uncertain. "Maybe just some scrambled eggs and coffee," she said, eyes downcast. He sensed she was still uncomfortable accepting help, but she was letting her guard down enough to share a meal. Once the barista left, they sat in a brief lull, both looking outside at pedestrians hurrying along under umbrellas. Raindrops clung to the cafe window like crystalline beads, distorting the passing crowd. Finally, Richard ventured a question. "Is there anyone I can call for you? Family? Friends?" Olivia's expression hardened a bit, a reflexive defense. "No," she answered, rapping her fingers on the wooden tabletop. "My mom died a few years back. I never knew my dad. Extended family, well, they're not really an option." He nodded, not pressing further. He realized how personal these details were, how painful. Instead, he leaned back, letting the gentle strum of guitar music fill the space. The barista returned with their coffees, steaming ceramic cups that brought immediate warmth to their cold hands. As Olivia sipped her coffee, Richard noticed her eyes darting around, watching other patrons, making sure no one seemed suspicious or threatening. He wondered how many nights of fear or confrontation had shaped that vigilance. "You said you're a businessman, right?" she asked after a few moments, curiosity lighting in her gaze. Richard let out a small huff, half laugh. "Something like that, yeah. I run a holdings company, investments, real estate, some tech ventures, but it's not as glamorous as it sounds." She gave him a half smile, a flicker of humor crossing her expression. "Oh, I'm sure it's plenty glamorous," she said. Then a glint of something more vulnerable surfaced. "But thank you for not being, a jerk about all this." He could only manage a nod, unsure how to respond to her gratitude. A swirl of emotions twisted inside him. Compassion, guilt, even a tinge of admiration for her resilience. She'd faced a world of difficulties he couldn't begin to fathom. Their plates arrived, eggs hot and fluffy, accompanied by toast with butter and jam. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped them as they began to eat. For a minute or two, they focused on their food, each quietly savoring the novelty of normalcy. Richard realized how different this was from the stiff, formal breakfasts he'd endured with Andrea, always on a schedule, always with an eye on the next meeting. Here, with Olivia, each bite felt grounded in the moment, unhurried. Eventually, Richard braved the question that had been gnawing at him all morning. "Olivia," he began, carefully, "I know you might not trust me yet, but I don't think one night in a motel is a real solution. If you're up for it, maybe we could figure out something more stable?" Her gaze flicked up. "Like what?" she asked, though her tone suggested she both wanted and feared the answer. He glanced out the window, at the gray drizzle. "I'm not sure yet, but maybe you could stay at the motel for a bit, on me, while we sort out something else. Or if you ever wanted to consider a place of your own, I could help." He paused, choosing his words. "No strings attached. I just don't want to drop you right back in the same situation." A flush of conflicting emotions crossed her face. Pride kept her posture stiff, but her eyes shone with quiet longing. "I don't want pity," she mumbled, clenching her fork. "I'm not a charity case." He met her gaze, forcing gentleness into his voice. "I know, and it's not pity, truly. Think of it as me wanting to help a new friend who's had it rough." A small smile tugged at his lips. Or maybe you can pay me back someday, if that makes you more comfortable." She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Pay you back, huh?" She pursed her lips as though considering the idea. "That would make me feel less beholden." "Absolutely," he said, buoyed by her response. "And it doesn't have to be money. It could be, well, we'll figure it out." She toyed with her fork, glancing at the half-eaten eggs. "All right, I'll think about it. But if I do accept, it's just until I can stand on my own, okay?" He nodded, relieved. "That's all I want, to make sure you can get back on your feet." Silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy with possibility. Outside, the drizzle finally gave way to a faint drizzle-turned mist, brightening the damp sidewalks. When they were done eating, Richard paid at the register, ignoring the curious glances of the barista. He left a generous tip, a small token of thanks for letting them linger. Stepping back onto the sidewalk, they noticed the day had grown warmer, or at least less bitter. Olivia zipped up her hoodie, shoulders drawn in under the subdued light. "So, about today," Richard began. "Anything you need to do?" She gave him a pensive look. "I do have a few personal belongings stashed, somewhere." She trailed off, clearly reluctant to specify, but he gathered it was likely in a public storage locker or some safe corner of the city. "I'd like to grab them if I can." "Of course," he said gently. "Where to?" She hesitated, then gave him an address near an abandoned lot. Her eyes flicked to the side as if waiting for judgment. Richard only nodded, leading her back to his car. As they pulled away, the city's pulse resumed around them, the usual friction of vehicles and pedestrians crossing the wet roads in a hurry. Neither spoke for a bit, each lost in their own reflections. Richard kept glancing at Olivia out of the corner of his eye, noticing the flicker of gratitude mixed with a persistent wariness. She was inching toward trust, but not quite there. He would have to tread carefully. In the back of his mind, a subdued ache reminded him that in helping Olivia, he was also distracting himself from his own heartbreak. He wondered if someday that heartbreak would flare again, and whether Andrea would attempt to waltz back into his life or vanish entirely. But for now, the path forward seemed clear. Help the stranger he'd found on Valentine's Day. The rest could wait. They drove on, weaving through the city blocks. A cluster of seagulls circled overhead, wings glinting in the intermittent rays of sun that pierced the clouds. At a traffic light, Richard glanced at Olivia, who was watching the birds with a thoughtful expression, as if they symbolized freedom she'd never tasted. And he couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, fate had led him here, to offer a glimmer of hope to someone who needed it, on a day when he himself had felt hopeless. The rhythmic click of the car's turn signal punctuated the silence as Richard guided the sedan onto an uneven side street. Here, the city took on a more derelict complexion. Graffiti-covered walls, cracked sidewalks with wild grass poking through, and a scattering of old abandoned warehouses. The contrast with the high-rises and polished offices they'd just passed was striking. Olivia shifted in her seat. She gave a brief, uneasy nod toward a chain-link fence sagging in disrepair. "You can stop around here," she said quietly. "I stashed my stuff in that building out of sight." Richard pulled over and killed the engine, eyeing the surroundings through the windshield. Discarded tires and broken pallets cluttered the lot, and a few stray cats prowled under rusted cars. If not for the weak daylight, the place would have seemed foreboding. But the morning sun, diffused by gray clouds, lent it a muted calm. He glanced at Olivia. "Should I come with you?" She paused, considering his offer. For a moment her pride seemed to flare. She was used to navigating these nooks on her own, but with a small sigh, she nodded. "If you don't mind." Her eyes flicked to a distant corner where a man in a threadbare jacket was rummaging through a dumpster. "Sometimes there are people around. Better to be careful." Richard nodded in understanding. "All right, let's go." They stepped out of the car, leaving it locked behind them. Olivia led the way, weaving through the lot, her steps sure-footed despite the broken cement and scattered debris. There was a certain fluidity to how she moved, as though every piece of litter or collapsed crate was a familiar landmark. Richard followed her between rust-stained shipping containers, the air thick with the tang of metal and old engine oil. Near the back of a crumbling warehouse, part of the chain-link fence had been pried open, forming a gap just wide enough for one person to slip through. Olivia ducked down, wincing a bit when the jagged wires caught the sleeve of her hoodie. Richard angled himself carefully to avoid the same hazard. Once inside the perimeter, they entered the building through a side door, its hinges so rusted that it groaned under the slightest push. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, its ceiling soaring high above them. Broken skylights let in beams of dull daylight, illuminating swirling dust motes. The echo of their footsteps bounced off concrete walls. Discarded cardboard boxes and pallets formed makeshift partitions. It was clear that over time this space had served as an improvised shelter for various people. Old blankets, empty cans, and tattered sleeping bags bore silent witness to countless nights spent hidden from the elements. "Over here," Olivia murmured, turning down a narrow hallway that seemed to have been an office section once. Doors hung off their hinges, and a thick layer of grime coated the tile floors. At the far end stood a locked storeroom door, or at least it had once been locked. A small window in the door had been shattered, and a piece of plywood served as a haphazard patch. She reached into her pocket, fishing out a small key. "Got lucky that whoever used this room last left a padlock I could reuse," she explained, voice echoing softly in the hushed corridor. Richard watched as she knelt, fiddling with a metal padlock threaded through the door's old latch. Within a minute, the lock clattered open. She gently pushed the door, letting them in. The space beyond was cramped and windowless, but Olivia had transformed it into a personal safe spot. A stack of plastic containers sat along one wall, a few folded blankets on the other. Even in the dimness, he could see that she'd tried to keep it relatively clean. "This is where you come for your things?" he asked, scanning the small hoard of items. There were books, carefully piled. Some looked water-damaged, while others were in better shape. A couple of stuffed animals peeked out from a plastic bag. On top sat a battered sketch pad with curly edges. She shrugged, pushing aside a container to check its contents. "I've moved around a lot," she said, her tone carrying a hint of resignation. "But this place is off most people's radar. Cops don't bother with it much, and the folks who hang around usually keep to themselves." Richard noticed a slight flush of embarrassment on her cheeks, as if she feared his judgment of her makeshift storeroom. Instead, he felt only respect for how resourceful she was, surviving in a city that often turned a blind eye to hardship. She opened a container to reveal a few changes of clothes: folded jeans, t-shirts, and a worn pair of sneakers. Another container held random personal trinkets, some photos, a spiral notebook, pens, a hairbrush. She set aside the photos, snapshots of a younger Olivia with an older woman, presumably her mother, wearing matching smiles. A wave of sadness flickered across her face as she glanced at them, then quickly set them back. "I can help you carry anything," Richard offered softly. She handed him a small box. "These are important," she said, though she didn't elaborate. He took it from her with care, slipping it under his arm. It took only 10 minutes to gather everything she wanted, enough to fill a medium duffel bag plus the small box. She left behind some heavier items she didn't need anymore, including a broken portable heater. Finally, she closed the container lids, put them neatly in a corner, and replaced the padlock on the door. By the time they stepped back out into the corridor, arms full, the dust in the air seemed to sparkle with a faint sense of closure. As they retraced their steps out of the warehouse, daylight had grown a shade brighter. The man rummaging in the dumpster was gone, replaced by a stray dog nosing around a battered trash can. Olivia tightened her grip on the duffel. "I really appreciate this," she admitted in a low voice. "Most people wouldn't bother helping me grab my old stuff." Richard offered a gentle smile. "Well, I'm not most people," he replied, though his tone wasn't boastful, just matter of fact. He paused, looking around at the neglected environment. "Let's get out of here. You deserve better than this." They slipped back through the gap in the fence, wincing at the metallic scrape, and returned to the sedan. As Richard opened the trunk, Olivia carefully placed her duffel inside, ensuring nothing was crushed. She kept the small box on her lap when they got into the car, balancing it as though it contained something fragile. "Anything else you want to do?" he asked as the engine revved to life. A contemplative hush settled. Then she replied, "Maybe just head back to the motel for now. I want to go through some of these things, see what's still usable." "Sure," he said, pulling away from the curb. The sense of relief in his chest grew. She trusted him enough to let him see where she'd kept her belongings. That felt like a step forward. They navigated the city streets once more, returning to the Maple Inn. The neon sign was still off, but a new clerk manned the front desk, scrolling through his phone in boredom. Olivia led the way to her room, 214, her posture a little straighter than the night before. Once inside, she set the small box on the round table near the window. Richard closed the door gently behind them, an unspoken question lingering in the air. What now? He glanced around, noticing she'd tidied the room a bit. The bed was made and she'd stacked the fresh towels. There was a plastic bag from some convenience store with snack wrappers. He realized with a twinge of guilt that she'd probably scrounged up dinner on her own while he was away. She opened the duffel, rummaging through clothes and trinkets. With each item, a subtle piece of her story emerged. A battered library card, a small crocheted scarf with a loose thread, an old MP3 player that likely no longer held a charge. She sorted them methodically, separating items she wanted to keep from those she might discard. Richard stepped closer when she carefully unlatched the small box. Inside were a few letters, yellowed and creased, along with a tiny music box shaped like a heart. The paint was chipped, but when she gently turned the winding key, a tinkling melody played. Soft, haunting notes that filled the motel room with a sweet, if slightly off-kilter, lullaby. "It was my mom's," Olivia said, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the twirling mechanism inside the heart-shaped box. "She used to play this for me when I couldn't sleep." Richard watched the tiny metal figurine spin in slow circles. The lumps of emotion in his throat welled up unexpectedly. He couldn't help but recall the emptiness of his own luxurious penthouse, the useless display of Valentine's roses left to wither on the marble floor. He wondered which of them was truly poor. A long silence followed the final dwindling notes of the music box. Then Olivia closed it carefully, swallowing hard. "She died of an illness. I couldn't afford, we couldn't afford all the treatments she needed. After that, I ended up on my own." His chest constricted. "I'm sorry," he said softly, and for once the phrase didn't feel hollow. It felt like the only truth he could offer in the face of her grief. She nodded, eyes damp but resolute. "I've managed. Still manage." They both let that hang in the air. Outside the window, traffic hummed. A radio playing from somewhere in the parking lot drifted through the thin walls, a talk show commentator rattling off headlines about the economy. "Anyway," Olivia murmured, exhaling slowly, "thanks for letting me do this on my terms. Some people would have tried to push me into a corner." Richard tucked his hands into his jacket pockets, finding no need to fill the hush with any grand statements. She'd chosen to share her world piece by piece, and that was enough of an acknowledgement that his efforts were appreciated. A moment later, he cleared his throat. "So, do you want me to pay for another night here? Or are you open to me trying to find someplace else you can stay?" She glanced at the rumpled bed, then cast a quick look at the chipped motel furniture. This place is fine for now, but only short term. I can't stay cooped up in a motel forever." She gave a shaky grin. "I mean, I appreciate it. Don't get me wrong. But eventually, I want a real place. A real job." He spread his arms in a gesture of solidarity. "I get it. And I'd like to help however I can. If you want a job, maybe I can put out some feelers. Or if you need more time, that's okay too." Her expression conveyed a tangle of emotions: hope, disbelief, pride, and a twinge of embarrassment. She set aside the box, standing to face him fully. "I don't know what I can do yet," she admitted. "But I want to try. It's been a long road, you know?" He nodded, noticing her resolute posture. "I do know, or at least I'm beginning to." Silence settled for another stretch of heartbeats. Finally, she asked, "So what's your deal anyway? I mean, I know your name and that you've got money, but beyond that—" Richard let out a slightly awkward chuckle, surprised at being the subject of her curiosity. "My deal? Well, I'm from an old money family. I built on it by investing in tech startups and real estate. Married young, someone else with a wealthy background. But, that's not going well." He shrugged. "We were two people who never really connected, I guess. And now it's just me, a big fancy apartment, and a boatload of regrets." She studied him, as though weighing his sincerity. "Funny how we can both feel alone in such different worlds," she mused. He swallowed, struck by the profundity of her observation. "Yeah," he admitted softly, "it really is." Another hush. Then Olivia gestured at the half-open door. "Maybe we could go out, do something normal, walk around, see if I can find places hiring. I'm tired of letting each day drift by." Richard blinked at the abrupt suggestion, but a spark of excitement rose in him. This is progress, he thought. She wanted to take control, to shape a future. He nodded. "Sounds good. Let's do that." She zipped up her hoodie and grabbed the small box containing the music box. Gently, she placed it into her duffel, burying it beneath layers of folded clothes. Then she straightened. "I'm ready," she announced, determination flickering in her eyes. With that, they left the motel room behind, stepping into the late morning light. Though the air still carried a chill and clouds loomed overhead, a cautious optimism coursed between them. Even if the path ahead was uncertain, they walked it side by side, forging a new understanding in the spaces once occupied by fear and solitude. The midday air hung heavy with the lingering scent of rain as Olivia and Richard left the Maple Inn parking lot on foot. The clouds overhead, thick and gray, seemed indecisive about whether to unleash another deluge or retreat altogether. Every so often, a stray droplet splashed onto the pavement, prompting Olivia to instinctively tighten her hoodie. It was almost as if she expected the weather to mirror the uncertainty in her life. They wandered through a series of narrow streets, weaving past older brick buildings that bore decades of city history. Corners that once might have held bustling storefronts now lay empty, their windows boarded up. Richard couldn't help noticing that this side of town looked worlds away from the polished corporate district he frequented. He slid his hands into his jacket pockets, glancing sideways at Olivia's profile. She was resolute, eyes scanning each passing shop sign as though searching for an opportunity waiting to be uncovered. After all, it had been her suggestion to try a different approach, step out, see what was out there. "Any particular type of job you have in mind?" he asked at last, breaking a silence that carried more than a hint of anticipation. She shrugged, gaze fixed on a dilapidated notice board pinned with flyers. "I used to do small gigs, cleaning houses, washing dishes in restaurants, sometimes store clerk stuff. But I don't have official references, and it's tough convincing managers I'm reliable when I don't have a permanent address." She paused, then forced a half-smile. "And some don't want to take a chance on me." Richard exhaled, absorbing the obvious frustration in her tone. "I could make a few calls," he offered gently. but I don't want to overshadow your own efforts. Let's see if we find anything that feels right first." She gave him a nod, grateful, but still determined to handle this in a way that allowed her some agency. They pressed on, shoes splashing through shallow puddles. Occasionally, they passed a sign in a shop window, "Help Wanted," only to discover the job was already filled or the requirements too rigid. Still, Olivia remained undaunted, scribbling down phone numbers in a small notebook she'd produced from her bag. They came across a modest sandwich shop with an orange neon sign reading Gus's Eats. An older man stood behind the counter, slicing deli meat with the casual grace of someone who'd done the job for decades. Through the window, they saw a sign tacked near the register, "Part-time helper needed." Olivia stopped short, biting her lip in contemplation. Then she squared her shoulders and gestured for Richard to follow. Inside, the warm aroma of fresh bread and peppery meats enveloped them. A few customers were seated at small tables, some alone, scrolling through their phones, others chatting over half-eaten subs. Richard noted how Olivia's posture changed. She was pushing herself to be confident, to conceal the uncertainties swirling in her mind. The man behind the counter, presumably Gus, looked up. He was stout, with a silver mustache and friendly eyes etched by laugh lines. "Afternoon," he greeted. "Hi," Olivia said, voice steady. She pointed at the sign near the register. "I saw you're looking for help." Gus glanced at the sign and nodded. "Sure am. Need someone who can do a bit of everything. Bussing tables, operating the register, maybe handling deliveries if you've got a license. It's not full-time, but a few hours each day." He wiped his hands on his apron, eyeing Olivia and Richard curiously. "You got experience?" "I've worked in a cafe before," Olivia replied, omitting the fact that the job lasted only a couple of months before she lost a place to stay. "Mostly washing dishes, some basic register work." She offered a small smile. "I learn fast." Gus studied her, then glanced at Richard, perhaps trying to figure out their relationship. Richard gave a polite nod but stayed quiet. This was Olivia's interview, after all. Finally, Gus shrugged. "I could use an extra pair of hands. Pays minimum wage plus tips, and I'm flexible on scheduling, as long as you show up on time." Olivia brightened. "I can do that. When would I start?" "How about tomorrow?" Gus suggested, picking up a slip of paper. "You can give me your details. Come in around noon, see how you handle the lunch rush." She hesitated, exchanging a quick glance with Richard. He gave her a subtle thumbs up. "Sounds great," Olivia said, relief mingling with excitement in her voice. She jotted her name and number on the paper, though the address line remained blank. Gus didn't seem to notice. He just tucked the note into his apron pocket. "Show up tomorrow, noon sharp. I'll teach you the ropes." "Thank you," she murmured, heart pounding with cautious optimism. With a final nod, they left the sandwich shop, stepping back into the street. Once outside, Olivia exhaled a shaky breath. "I can't believe it," she said half to herself. "I actually got a start date." She glanced at Richard, a hesitant smile tugging at her lips. "It's just part-time, but at least it's something." He returned her smile, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "You made a solid impression, and you did it on your own merit. No help from me needed." He paused, scanning her expression. "Feel good?" She nodded, hugging her arms around herself. "Yeah, I do." They continued walking, the tension in the air somewhat lifted. The city seemed a fraction brighter, even though the sun was still hidden behind clouds. A watery gleam of daylight reflected off windows and puddles, creating small sparks of light wherever they turned. After ambling a bit longer, they turned onto a block featuring a tiny bookstore, a vintage thrift shop, and a narrow bakery with a bright pink awning. The aroma of sugary pastries wafted into the street, teasing them. Richard's stomach gave a small growl and Olivia grinned wryly. "That breakfast was hours ago," she quipped. "I'm tempted to try something sweet," Richard admitted with a chuckle. He gestured to the bakery. "You up for it?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure, why not?" Inside, the bakery was all pastel walls and glass counters brimming with rows of cupcakes, croissants, and pies. An elderly woman behind the display case smiled in welcome. "Take your time, dear," she said when Olivia wandered close to check the options. Richard ordered a hot chocolate, while Olivia picked out a small frosted cupcake with a swirl of vanilla icing. They took a seat by the window, the setting reminiscent of their cafe trip earlier in the morning, but now laced with the sweet promise of dessert. Olivia carefully peeled the wrapper from her cupcake, talking in a low voice about the tasks Gus might assign her, like an excited swirl of thoughts regarding her new part-time role. She spoke of how she'd manage each responsibility, from tidying up tables to handling the register. Richard, sipping his hot chocolate, listened intently. He sensed her cautious hope blossoming. One job, even if part-time, could mean bridging the gap between survival and something closer to stability. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a familiar figure entering the bakery, a business acquaintance named Martin. They'd crossed paths at various charity galas. Martin wore a tailored suit, scanning the bakery as though searching for something. The moment Martin's gaze landed on Richard, recognition sparked, and his eyebrows shot up. He raised a hand in greeting, heading toward their table with a confident stride. "Richard, fancy seeing you here," Martin said, half smiling as he assessed the situation. "Taking a break from the corporate world, I see." Richard forced a neutral grin. "Something like that," he replied, aware that Martin's eyes were lingering on Olivia, who looked momentarily uneasy at the intrusion. "I'm, just out with a friend." "Pleasure," Martin said, nodding politely at Olivia, although the curiosity in his eyes was evident. "Haven't seen you at any events recently, Richard. Everything all right?" A slight tension rippled through Richard, triggered by the memory of Andrea's abrupt departure. "Yeah, just a busy schedule," he said vaguely. "Working on some personal projects." Martin nodded, but his inquisitive gaze suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, I should let you get back to your day," he said, stepping back. "Just wanted to say hello. Let's catch up soon, yeah?" "Sure," Richard lied, nodding politely. "Take care." Once Martin left, Olivia exhaled a breath she'd been holding. "He knows you?" she asked quietly. "From charity circuits, networking events, stuff like that?" Richard explained, swirling his half-finished hot chocolate. "When you come from my background, there are a lot of, well, formalities." She stared at her cupcake for a moment, absorbing this glimpse into his world. He looked curious, maybe even suspicious, she noted. Richard shrugged. "He's probably wondering why I'm in a small bakery on this side of town not wearing my usual suit. Let him wonder." The tension eased a bit, and they fell into lighter conversation as Olivia took a bite of her cupcake. Whipped vanilla frosting perched on her lip for a second before she wiped it away, a small laugh escaping. The carefree moment felt almost surreal. Two people bridging the gap between heartbreak and struggle, forging a kind of camaraderie over sweet pastries. Eventually, they finished up and stepped back outside. The drizzle had picked up again, dusting the street with a fresh sheen. Richard glanced at the sky. "We might need to head back soon if this turns into another storm." Olivia nodded, adjusting her backpack strap. "Yeah, and I should rest before tomorrow's shift." They decided to hail a rideshare for convenience. Richard insisted on paying despite Olivia's half-hearted protest. By the time they reached the Maple Inn, the raindrops had begun pelting the car windows in earnest, blurring the neon sign out front. The driver, bored, barely acknowledged them as they hopped out. Standing under the motel's narrow awning, they studied each other. The sky rumbled overhead, and water trickled down the edges of the corrugated roofing. "So," Olivia said, glancing at her phone's display, still the old model Richard had noticed before. "Tomorrow at noon. I guess I'll see if I can make a real go of it." She paused, then looked at him directly. "Thank you for everything." Richard smiled, a genuine light in his eyes. "I'm glad to help, and I'm proud of you for taking that step." If you need anything else, just call, all right? She dipped her head, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. I will. With that, she fiddled with the motel room key in her hand. Good night, or, well, good afternoon, she corrected, noticing the clock read late afternoon. See you soon, maybe? He nodded. Absolutely. I'll text you in the morning, make sure you're all set for the first day. Then, as if reading each other's minds, they both turned away at the same time. Her heading for the stairwell leading to room 214, him standing by, prepared to leave. He watched her ascend, the duffel bag strap slung across her shoulder, a new determination in every step. Only when he saw the door close behind her did he head back toward the parking lot, heart oddly full. In the sky above, the clouds continued their dance, sending sporadic showers down on the city. But for the first time in a while, Richard felt that the storm within him was subsiding. A single part-time job might not solve every problem in Olivia's life, but it was a start, and in that start lay hope for a future beyond day-to-day survival. And for Richard, it was another reminder that genuine connection wasn't just a business transaction. Sometimes it grew in unexpected spaces between two people who simply took the time to help one another stand in the rain. He turned the key in his car's ignition, the engine humming with subdued energy. His mind returned briefly to Andrea's text, the last vestige of a life he'd once thought unshakable. Now, everything was changing. He was discovering that maybe heartbreak could be a doorway, to empathy, to a new sense of purpose, to a second chance at forging meaningful human bonds. With that thought, he drove off into the rain, ready to see what tomorrow would bring. Morning arrived with a tapestry of promise and nerves. Olivia woke to the beep of her phone's alarm, half dazed in the Maple Inn's modest bed. Faded curtains allowed streaks of pale sunlight to pierce the room, illuminating the scattered belongings she'd brought from the warehouse. For a moment, she lay still, gathering her composure. First day on the job. Part of her couldn't quite believe that, after so much uncertainty, she finally had a means to earn some money and perhaps a measure of independence. She glanced at the digital clock by the bedside. 10:17 a.m. 2 hours until her shift, she thought, heart kicking up a notch. Rolling off the mattress, she tucked her hair into a loose ponytail and rummaged through her duffel for a decent outfit. What do you wear to work in a sandwich shop anyway? She ended up choosing dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt, figuring comfort mattered more than style for bussing tables and handling customers. A soft ping signaled a text message. Instinctively, Olivia's heart squeezed. She wasn't used to her phone lighting up with anything but spam or the occasional promotional offer. She wiped sweat from her palm before picking it up. Morning! How are you feeling? Ready for day one? Let me know if you need a ride. Richard. Despite herself, Olivia couldn't help smiling. The warmth of his support seeped through every word. He really wants to help, she marveled, a conflicted gratitude swirling in her chest. She typed a quick reply. Nervous, but good. I can catch the bus. Appreciate the offer, though. Moments later, a second ping. All right, if you change your mind, just holler. You've got this. She exhaled, trying not to dwell on the complexity of their dynamic. He's a friend, she told herself. Someone who's shown more kindness in a few days than most have in months. Yet there was a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. Don't become dependent on him. You've learned how fleeting trust can be. Pushing that aside, she laced up her sneakers, splashed water on her face in the cramped motel bathroom, and decided to walk, not bus. She preferred the fresh air for clearing her head. By 11:00 a.m., Olivia was out the door, a small backpack slung over her shoulder, containing her phone charger and a few personal items. She locked the motel room, pausing to gaze at the damp parking lot. A few guests milled about, and housekeeping carts dotted the walkway. Will I ever be able to afford better? She wondered. Perhaps if this job panned out and she could set aside savings, at least it was a step forward. The sky overhead had shifted from charcoal gray to a lighter, uncertain silver. Puddles from the previous day's drizzle reflected the bleached clouds, and she found herself dodging shallow pools as she walked. The city around her was steadily waking up. Cars jammed intersections, vendors opened stalls, and the aroma of fried street food wafted from cramped kitchens. It reminded her that, behind every corner, life churned on, indifferent to any individual struggles. Gus's sandwich shop was in a slightly busier district than the motel. By the time Olivia reached it, around 11:45, she noticed a steady trickle of lunch-hour patrons filtering through the doors. Through the glass, she spotted Gus at the counter, slicing a loaf of crusty bread. Another employee, a young woman with a bright red apron, took orders at the register. "All right," Olivia thought, steeling herself. "Let's do this." She slipped inside, heart thumping with anticipation. The mingled scent of cured meats, fresh cheese, and yeasty bread wrapped around her as she stepped forward. "Hey!" Gus called over the low hum of customer chatter, looking up from his prep station. "You're early, kid. Good. I like that." A hint of pride welled in Olivia's chest. "Just wanted to be sure I wasn't late." She tried to sound confident, though her pulse betrayed her nerves. Gus handed off the loaf of bread to the other worker and motioned for Olivia to follow him behind the counter. "All right, so this is Leslie," he said, introducing the woman in the red apron, who gave Olivia a friendly nod. "Leslie knows the ropes. She'll show you the register, how to punch in orders. I'll have you do some table cleanup first. Lunch rush can be hectic, so just keep moving, keep those tables wiped, keep napkin dispensers stocked. Got it?" Olivia nodded, eager to absorb every instruction. She moved quickly to the back, where she found a spare apron and cap, both labeled Gus's Eats in embroidered letters. The ensemble was a bit worn, but it fit well enough. When she re-emerged, Gus handed her a damp cloth and a spray bottle of cleaning solution. "First step, wipe down the empty tables, then help Leslie if she needs it." Clutching the cleaning supplies, Olivia stepped into the small seating area. At least half the tables were occupied by customers munching on sandwiches, chatting, or scrolling on phones. She spotted a newly vacated table with crumbs scattered across it, so she headed over. As she sprayed and wiped, she focused on maintaining a calm, assured demeanor. The awkwardness of suddenly being in a public-facing role after so much time in the shadows weighed on her, but she pushed it aside. Within minutes, she found a rhythm. Wipe, collect trash, replace condiments, repeat. Then she'd check in with Leslie, who occasionally pointed out tables needing extra attention or let her know when a customer needed help finding napkins. Once in a while, Olivia's eyes flicked toward Gus at the prep counter, confirming that he seemed satisfied with her efforts. He offered the occasional nod of approval. The lunch rush grew steadily. A swirl of new patrons entered around noon, forming a short line at the counter. Olivia hustled between tables, scooping up empty plates and tumblers, disposing of wrappers. She discovered she actually enjoyed the busy pace. There wasn't time to dwell on doubts or insecurities. Each completed task felt like a small victory. After an hour, Leslie beckoned her to the register. "Let's get you trained on this real quick. When Gus is slammed with sandwiches, I need a backup." Olivia stepped up to the compact touchscreen display. Leslie demonstrated how to ring up different sandwich combos, how to add drinks, and how to handle payment, be it cash or card. Though Olivia felt her nerves spike again, technology had never been her strong suit. She followed Leslie's instructions diligently. A few test runs later, Olivia managed to process a small order for a hesitant customer who was trying to decide between turkey or roast beef. By the time the man left, bag in hand, Olivia felt a surge of confidence. "Good job," Leslie said, flashing a grin. "Just keep calm. If you mess something up, we can fix it in the system. Customers might get impatient, but most aren't too bad." Olivia nodded. She noticed her reflection in the little plexiglass shield by the register, sweaty forehead beneath the shop's cap, cheeks pink from exertion. But I'm doing it, she reminded herself, half in disbelief. Around 1 p.m., the lunch wave peaked. People poured in, scanning the overhead menu signs, and the register beeped incessantly as Leslie and Olivia alternated taking orders. Occasionally, Gus barked a question from the prep station. "We out of Swiss? Or is it just hiding in the fridge?" And Olivia or Leslie would respond without missing a beat. The chaos felt almost musical in its flow, each person playing a role in a hurried ensemble. At one point, a slender man in a business suit approached the counter, phone in hand, talking loudly with someone on the other end. He rattled off an order in a brusque tone. "Italian combo, hold the mustard, extra peppers, side of chips, not fries." Olivia keyed it in carefully, double-checking each detail on screen. The man's impatient glare made her palms sweat, but she pushed through, reading back his order to confirm. He nodded curtly and walked off to the side, still on his call. Leslie offered Olivia a supportive nod as soon as he was out of earshot. Before she realized it, the clock inched toward 2 p.m., and the crowd began to thin. Gus signaled a short break. "Take 5, kid," he said, removing a mesh cap from his head and wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Grab a sandwich if you're hungry." "Thanks," Olivia responded, relieved. She hadn't expected a free meal, but the notion was welcome. Her stomach fluttered with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. So far, so good. She prepped a simple turkey sandwich, using the shop's ingredients. Leslie, finishing up a few receipts, winked. "Perk of the job," she said. Olivia took her sandwich to a corner table, sinking into a chair gratefully. Her legs felt stiff from standing, but her spirit was light. She hadn't felt this sense of purpose in a long time. Taking a first bite, she savored the taste. Fresh lettuce, tangy mustard, thin-sliced turkey. A normal meal, earned through real work, she mused, unable to stifle a small, proud smile. Just as she finished her break, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Glancing around to make sure she wasn't needed at that exact second, she fished it out. A message from Richard lit the screen. "How's it going?" "Surviving the lunch rush?" Her cheeks warmed. Quickly she typed a reply. "Busy but good. I'm on a short break. Thanks for checking in." He responded almost immediately. "Proud of you. Let me know when you're done. Maybe we can grab coffee or something." Olivia debated for a moment. She appreciated his kindness, but a part of her wanted to prove she could handle life on her own. Still, she typed back, "We'll see how I feel after my shift. Might be wiped. Thanks again, though." Returning to the register, she gave Leslie a nod, ready to keep going. For the next hour or so, the shop settled into a more subdued pace. A handful of customers trickled in for late lunches, while some lingered over coffee and pastries. Olivia alternated between wiping tables and ringing up the occasional order. Gus observed her efforts, offering pointers on bagging orders more efficiently, praising her hustle when she sprinted to refill the drink station. By the time 3:30 p.m. rolled around, Gus announced he didn't need both her and Leslie on duty. "Leslie can handle whatever's left," he said, tapping the corner of the sandwich prep counter. "You did well for your first day. Really, I'm impressed. Come back at noon tomorrow, same deal." Olivia carefully removed her apron and folded it. "Thanks," she said, voice brimming with sincerity. "This means a lot." He gave a curt nod, though a faint smile edged his weathered features. "Take your tips from the jar, too. Half of what's there is yours for the lunch shift." Surprised, Olivia peered into the tip jar near the register. She'd assumed it all went to Leslie or Gus. Scooping out her portion, she realized it amounted to a modest sum, maybe $10 or $12. Still, it felt like a fortune compared to nothing. With a parting wave to Leslie, who offered a fist bump, Olivia headed out the door. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the cloud cover, painting the pavement with patches of golden warmth. She stood on the sidewalk, exhaling a long breath, letting the significance of the moment wash over her. She'd done it. Day 1 in the bag. She glanced at her phone. Another text from Richard sent just moments ago. "Hey, hope your shift ended well. I'm around if you need anything, or if you want to celebrate your first day." She curled her fingers around the device, contemplating. Did she want to celebrate? Did she need more time to process this victory on her own? After all, she was proud of herself for taking these steps independently. But Richard had been a part of her journey, offering a hand when no one else did. In the end, she typed back, "Shift's done. Went well. I think I'll grab a coffee near the motel. Thanks for being in my corner." His reply came swiftly. "Always. Congrats on day one." That single word, always, gave her pause. It implied longevity, commitment. "I've got to be careful," she reminded herself, though she couldn't deny a tiny flicker of warmth behind her ribs. A friend was a friend, and maybe it didn't have to be more complicated than that. Tucking the phone away, Olivia decided to stroll a bit, letting the sunshine soak into her skin. She took a longer route back toward the Maple Inn, her thoughts a blend of satisfaction and cautious optimism. Tomorrow would be another day, she told herself. Another chance to prove she could rebuild her life, piece by piece, job by job. And for the first time in what felt like ages, the future glimmered with possibility instead of dread. Late afternoon sunlight draped itself across the Maple Inn parking lot, lending an almost pleasant hue to the otherwise modest setting. A few cars were parked haphazardly, the sound of a distant TV crackled through one open window, and someone on the second floor was smoking, the faint scent drifting into the air. Olivia made her way up the worn metal steps to room 214, her mind still buzzing from her first successful day at Gus's sandwich shop. Slipping inside, she closed the door behind her and gently tossed her small backpack onto the bed. She stood in silence for a moment, letting out a breath that felt like an entire day's worth of tension leaving her body. I actually did it, she thought. I worked a whole shift, earned a little money, and no one treated me like I was invisible or suspicious. She kicked off her sneakers, noticing a faint ache in her feet, an ache she welcomed because it signaled honest work. A flicker on her phone's screen caught her attention. The battery was at a critical 6%. She scrounged for the charger in her bag and plugged it into the single outlet near the nightstand. Carefully placing the phone on the bedside table, she sank onto the mattress, stretching out her legs. Her gaze drifted to the duffel bag in the corner. Inside it lay the music box, those old photographs, a few pieces of clothing. It's not a real home, she acknowledged, eyes scanning the mismatched motel furniture. But it was shelter, something more stable than she'd had in months. The rumble of her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since she'd scarfed down that turkey sandwich on her lunch break. I could grab something from a corner store, she mused, already anticipating the blandness of gas station fare. With the meager tip money crinkling in her pocket, she considered splurging on something a bit better. But maybe I should save as much as I can, she countered mentally, the old survival reflex kicking in. While she debated, her phone buzzed to life on the nightstand. She caught it mid-vibration. Richard's name glowed on the screen. "Hey," she answered, keeping her tone neutral. "Olivia." His voice came through, warm and confident, yet not overbearing. "How are you feeling after your first day?" A small rush of gratitude coursed through her. "Tired," she admitted, "but good, really good." "That's what I like to hear," Richard replied. "Listen, I was thinking, if you're free this evening, maybe I could pick up some takeout and swing by the motel. We could celebrate your first successful shift." She stared at the thin motel curtains, mulling it over. Part of her wanted to celebrate, to share this little triumph. Another part hesitated, wary of getting too comfortable with Richard's generosity. But maybe it's okay to have a friend, she reassured herself. No harm in that. She exhaled. "Sure," she said quietly. "But don't go overboard, okay? I don't want to impose." A soft chuckle came from his end. "You're not imposing, I promise. Besides, we can just grab something simple. Pizza, maybe?" Pizza. She couldn't recall the last time she'd had a proper slice. Sounds good, she responded, letting a small, genuine smile tug at her lips. I'm in room 214. Got it, he said. I'll text when I'm close. They hung up, and she leaned back against the wall, heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and caution. This is just dinner, she reminded herself. A friend being supportive, if only it was that simple. Because beneath the surface, a deeper sense of reliance was forming, something she both appreciated and feared. Deciding not to overthink it, she hopped up to tidy the room. She gathered stray wrappers, folded the blankets, and arranged her few possessions neatly. If Richard was stopping by, she wanted it looking presentable, silly as that felt for a motel room. A short while later, her phone buzzed again. 5 minutes away. Hope you like pepperoni, she half smiled, tugging down the hem of her t-shirt and smoothing any wrinkles. Her reflection in the faded bathroom mirror stared back, hair a bit messy, eyes slightly tired but glowing with a newfound spark of pride. It's okay to have someone care, she told herself quietly. Soon enough, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Opening it, she found Richard holding a cardboard pizza box and a plastic bag that clearly contained 2 bottles of soda. He wore casual jeans and a light jacket, an easy grin on his face. Delivery, he joked, stepping into the room. His gaze swept over the modest furnishings, the freshly made bed and the duffel by the corner. Despite the slight awkwardness of being in a motel room together, he handled it gracefully, making no comment on the surroundings. Instead, he gestured to the small table near the window. Shall we? She nodded, closing the door behind him and flipping the lock. He placed the pizza box on the table and they both sat down on the pair of mismatched chairs. Olivia rubbed her hands together, the mouth-watering smell of pepperoni and melted cheese wafting up from the box. No use denying it. She was hungry. Richard popped open the box, revealing a large pepperoni pie. Hope you're okay with pepperoni, he said. I figured it was a safe bet. It's perfect, she assured him, stomach growling in anticipation. He handed her a paper plate, and she grabbed a slice, letting the cheese stretch in gooey strands before biting into the warm crust. They ate in comfortable silence at first. The pizza was fresh, the cheese still bubbling, and the tangy tomato sauce hit all the right notes. They both let out small, appreciative sighs. It was a simple pleasure, one that felt magnified by the stark environment around them. Eventually, between bites, Richard leaned back in his chair, brushing crumbs from his jeans. I remember my first job, he said, gazing at the dull motel lamp overhead. I was an intern at a financial firm my father had invested in. Thought I was hot stuff, wearing a pressed suit every day, totally clueless about real work. The only real task they gave me was filing documents and fetching coffee. Olivia swallowed a mouthful of pizza. Did you like it? He laughed softly. At the time, I hated it. I wanted to be in the boardroom making deals, but looking back, I think it was good for me. Taught me humility, well, a bit anyway. His expression clouded momentarily. I sometimes wonder how I'd have turned out if I didn't grow up with money. Maybe I'd appreciate things more. Olivia considered his words, feeling a twinge of empathy. I used to wish I had that kind of privilege, she admitted, picking at the pizza crust. Money, opportunities, not having to scramble for a meal or a roof, but after meeting you, I see it's not all bliss. Different problems, maybe. He gave her a thoughtful nod. Different problems, yeah. Losing Andrea reminded me how empty success can feel if you don't have a real connection. And then, meeting you, he added quietly, made me realize how I've been living in a bubble. There's so much I took for granted. A heaviness settled between them, mingled with an unspoken bond. They each chewed in silence, processing the unexpected paths that had brought them to this shared motel table. Outside, a muted breeze ruffled the broken curtains, and distant traffic murmured like a lullaby of the city. They finished their first slices and reached for seconds. Richard poured soda into plastic cups, offering one to Olivia. She accepted, sipping gratefully, the carbonation tickling her nose. "It's weird," she mused, glancing around the motel room. "I've been in and out of places like this, but somehow tonight feels different." He caught her eye. "How so?" "I'm not alone," she murmured softly, eyes lingering on her half-eaten slice. "And I'm not just talking about physically having you here. I mean, I have a job now. Some sense of direction." She paused, swallowing the emotion building in her throat. "Feels like I might really be able to turn things around." Richard's gaze flicked to her face, compassion etched in his features. "You will," he said firmly. "I can see it. You've got the drive." She blinked back, a sudden prickle in her eyes. "Thanks," she whispered. "I'm not used to having anyone believe in me except maybe my mom, back when she was alive." He shifted closer, setting his soda cup down. "Well, let me be the next person in your corner. We can figure out a plan, save some money, find a place that isn't a motel, maybe even go back to school if you want that someday." A flush crept across her cheeks. She wasn't sure if it was the idea of further education or just the weight of his unwavering confidence that made her blush. "Let's take it step by step," she managed, torn between excitement and fear of disappointment. He nodded, a gentle smile playing on his lips. Step by step, absolutely. They ate in companionable quiet for a while longer, each lost in hopeful scenarios. Outside, nightfall began to slip across the city, the final rays of dusk fading from the motel window. The overhead lamp cast a warm glow over the scene. A young woman who'd endured homelessness and heartache, a wealthy man learning to invest in compassion rather than just business, and a half-finished pizza bridging their two worlds. After the meal, Richard packed up the leftover slices. "I'll leave you these for tomorrow," he said, pressing the box lid shut. Olivia nodded gratefully. Free lunch for her next shift break, perhaps. When he finally stood to go, a quiet reluctance filled the room. Neither of them voiced it, but both felt the closing of this little pocket of comfort. As Olivia walked him to the door, she spoke up. "Thank you," she said, her voice brimming with sincerity. "For the pizza, for everything." He turned, meeting her gaze. "I'm proud of you, Olivia. You're taking control of your life. It's admirable." She smiled shyly, stepping back as he opened the door. The cool night air drifted in, carrying the muffled sounds of distant sirens. "Drive safe," she told him, hugging her arms around herself. He started to go, paused, then turned back. For a second it seemed like he might say more, but instead he simply lifted a hand in a gentle wave. "You too," he murmured before disappearing into the darkness of the walkway. Olivia closed the door with a soft click, feeling a surge of gratitude she couldn't quite articulate. Pizza and conversation might not fix every challenge in her life, but it gave her something tangible to hold on to, a reminder that change, however tentative, was possible. She slid down to sit on the edge of the bed, listening to the soft hum of the motel's air conditioner. In the tiny space of room 214, a flicker of hope glowed. Tomorrow she'd wake up, go to her next shift, and keep pushing forward. And for now, that was enough. The next morning arrived in a rush of activity and noise at the Maple Inn. The hallway outside Olivia's room filled with the clatter of housekeeping carts and the low murmur of guests checking out. She opened her eyes, disoriented for a moment by the beige walls and thin bedspread, until memory swept in. Second day of work. Rolling off the bed, she inhaled a steadying breath, a spark of anticipation and anxiety fluttering in her stomach. She sat up, brushing sleep from her eyes. Through the gap in the heavy drapes, a slice of dawn light glowed. It was barely 8 a.m., so she had a few hours before her shift. Her plan was to shower, put on something clean, then maybe walk to Gus's again. The leftover pizza Richard brought was still perched on the small table, enough for a quick breakfast. She tried not to dwell on how easily he slipped into her day-to-day life, how his presence in the simplest moments, like sharing a meal, had begun to feel oddly natural. As she made her way into the cramped bathroom, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Despite the dark circles under her eyes, the motel bed wasn't the most comfortable. She looked more alert than she had in months. Hope is a powerful thing, she mused, turning on the shower. The water pressure sputtered but eventually stabilized into a warm cascade. After washing away the remnants of sleep, she dressed in jeans and a plain shirt, similar to yesterday's attire. No reason to get fancy for a sandwich shop, she reminded herself with a wry smile. Carefully, she laced up her sneakers, checking her phone for messages. There was nothing from Richard yet, and she felt a half-twinge of relief, half-twinge of disappointment. Focus on your shift, she told herself. You can't rely on him for everything. She snagged a slice of cold pizza, still decent despite its overnight stay in a cardboard box, and decided to head out early. After double-checking the locked door, she hustled down the motel's exterior stairs, stepping into a crisp morning that smelled faintly of rain-soaked pavement. The sky threatened another drizzle, but for now it remained bright enough to walk comfortably. In less than an hour, she reached Gus's. The shop was closed, the neon open sign still dark. A quick glance through the glass door showed Gus setting up. She tried the handle, locked. With a wave, he motioned her to wait a moment and disappeared into the back. Soon, he re-emerged at the door, flipping the latch. "You're early again," he said, opening the door just enough for her to slip inside. "That's good." She couldn't help the flicker of pride. "Figured I'd get a head start, see if I could help set up." He nodded, handing her a damp cloth and pointing to a row of tables. "You can wipe these down. I've already swept, but there's always dust from the night." She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The hush inside the shop felt different without customers, almost tranquil, with only the buzz of refrigerators and the shuffle of Gus's footsteps behind the counter. She meticulously cleaned each tabletop, the repetitive motion calming her lingering nerves. At around 10:30, Leslie arrived, stifling a yawn. Her bright red apron hung over one arm, and she carried a large to-go cup of coffee. "Mornin'," she greeted, eyeing Olivia with a half-awake grin. You, definitely beat me here." Olivia shrugged lightly, a smile tugging her lips. "Just wanted to get a jump on things." Leslie nodded, setting her coffee on the counter. "No complaints from me. One less task I have to do." They spent the next hour prepping for the lunchtime rush, stocking napkins, refilling condiment dispensers, and checking if fresh bread had arrived. Gus coached Olivia on slicing tomatoes and onions at the prep station, guiding her with surprising patience. Despite the onion fumes pricking at her eyes, she found it oddly satisfying to be part of the behind-the-scenes hustle. By noon, the first wave of customers drifted in. Some were returning from the previous day, recognized Leslie or Gus, and gave Olivia a polite nod. She smiled back, feeling a small sense of belonging. This time, she juggled wiping tables and manning the register more confidently. She was still new, but she could sense her learning curve improving with every order. Amid the flurry of sandwich making and register transactions, her phone vibrated in her pocket, just once. She stole a moment between customers to check it. A text from Richard. "Thinking of stopping by for lunch, if that won't make you nervous. Would love to try one of Gus's famous sandwiches." Her heart jolted a bit. "It's not like he's checking up on me," she reasoned. "He genuinely seems interested in supporting my new job." She typed back quickly, "Come if you want, but it's busy. I might not get to chat much." He replied with a quick thumbs-up emoji, and she tucked the phone away, trying to refocus on the customer queue. The next half hour flew by in a blur. She processed payments, answered questions about the soup of the day, and sprinted to restock lids for the soda cups. Just after 12:45, the shop door swung open, and Richard stepped inside. He wore a simple button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves, looking more casual than corporate. Olivia caught his eye across the small crowd. He grinned in quiet encouragement but didn't try to monopolize her attention. Instead, he joined the line, scanning the overhead menu. When it was his turn at the register, she gave him a professional smile, the same courtesy she offered other customers. "Welcome to Gus's Eats," she teased lightly, playing the role. "What'll it be?" He smirked. "Let's see. I'll do the roast beef special, add cheddar, extra pickles if possible." She nodded, tapping the touchscreen. "Anything to drink?" "Just water," he said, placing a credit card on the counter. As she rang up the total, he dropped his voice a bit. "You're handling this like a pro." She felt a rush of warmth. "Thanks. Still learning?" He pressed his card into the reader, accepted the receipt, then moved aside to let the next customer step forward. Olivia mouthed a quick "thank you" again, before turning her focus to the new order. As the crowd ebbed and flowed, she spotted Richard settling at a small table near the window, sipping water while waiting for his sandwich. A few minutes later, Gus placed a wrapped roast beef on the counter, calling Richard's name. Olivia grabbed it first, aiming to deliver it personally. Maneuvering around a couple of patrons, she approached Richard's table. "Roast beef special, extra pickles," she announced softly, handing over the neatly wrapped sandwich. He glanced up, eyes shining with admiration. "Thank you, Ms. Employee of the Month." She rolled her eyes but laughed, stepping away to tend to another customer. Even so, she felt a small thrill at his playful support. The lunch rush continued but eventually slowed around 1:30. Richard finished his sandwich, gave Olivia a parting wave, and slipped out before she could do more than return his grin. Part of her felt relieved he hadn't lingered. She wanted to maintain her professional vibe, and too much attention might raise eyebrows with Gus or Leslie. Another part of her found his fleeting visit strangely uplifting. The last stretch of her shift was calmer, with only a trickle of stragglers ordering late lunches. Around 2:30, Gus clapped his hands together. "That's it for me. I need to pick up some supplies. Leslie's heading out for her break soon and we'll close early today. Slow Tuesdays, you know. You can clock out if you want." Olivia paused, glancing at the partially restocked shelves. "Anything else I can do before leaving?" He shook his head. "Nah, you're good. I appreciate your hard work, kid. Keep it up." Pride swelled in her chest again. "Thanks, Gus," she said, sliding off her apron. She collected her modest share of tips from the jar, about the same as the day before, maybe $1 or $2 more. Stepping outside, she realized the clouds had finally parted, revealing a soft blue sky. The rain-washed air smelled cleaner than usual. Checking her phone, she considered texting Richard to let him know she was free. "But maybe I'll handle my own errands," she reasoned, determined to stand on her own. Yet as she started walking toward the Maple Inn, she couldn't help scanning the street for Richard's car. A habit was forming. She caught herself looking for a sign of him wherever she went. "Be careful," a voice in her head warned. "You can't just exchange one dependency for another." "But maybe," she countered, "it's okay to let someone care about you, at least a little." She decided to indulge a small treat, stopping by a nearby convenience store for a bottled iced tea and a pack of gum. The cashier rang it up, eyes flicking briefly to Olivia's Gus's Eats t-shirt. If she noticed or cared, she didn't comment. With the tea in hand, Olivia strolled in the direction of the motel, head buzzing with thoughts about the next steps in her life. Maybe with a few paychecks saved up, she could look for a shared apartment, nothing fancy, but better than a motel. Gus had mentioned she was doing well, so maybe more hours could open up. She replayed Richard's suggestion about possibly going back to school one day, the idea tinged with both excitement and anxiety. One step at a time, she reminded herself. Just as she turned a corner near a row of vacant storefronts, her phone buzzed. She fished it from her pocket, half expecting a message from Richard. Instead, it was from a number she didn't recognize. She paused in her tracks, reading. "Olivia, this is someone from your past. I need to talk to you. Urgent. Please meet me at the old bus station at 6 p.m. A chill prickled her skin. The text was unsigned and her mind spun with questions. Who would contact her like this? Someone from your past, words that carried the weight of half-forgotten regrets and complicated relationships. Her pulse quickened. She considered ignoring it. Life had taught her to be wary of cryptic messages, yet a part of her burned with curiosity, desperate to uncover whether this was a relative, an old friend, or something more threatening. She typed a quick response. "Who is this?" She waited, standing in the deserted street, but no reply came. Anxiety twisted in her stomach. Could it be a scam? She thought about her mother's extended family. She'd never been close to them. Or someone she'd met during her months on the street? She tried not to imagine the worst. Ultimately, she slid the phone back into her pocket, pushing down a wave of unease. If no one clarified soon, she'd ignore it. But the message lingered in her mind, weaving an undercurrent of tension as she made the rest of the trek to the motel. By the time she reached room 214, the sunlight was shifting into a warm, late-afternoon glow, and she could almost convince herself the text wasn't worth the worry. She had enough on her plate. New job, saving money, figuring out the next steps. Focus on what's real, she told herself, placing the iced tea in the mini fridge and collapsing on the bed. Yet as the old AC unit rattled to life, she felt her thoughts drift back to the unknown message. 6 p.m. at the old bus station. That station was in a seedy part of town. She'd slept there on a cold night once, curled against a radiator for warmth. The memory made her shiver. Her phone lay on the pillow beside her, silent and still. Every few moments, she glanced at it, half hoping it would buzz with a follow-up, half hoping it wouldn't. She was no stranger to dealing with dangerous unknowns, but this time she had more to lose. The fragile new stability she was building might slip away if she stepped into something shady or reconnected with people who meant her harm. Still, what if it's important? A small voice prodded. What if it's someone who genuinely needs her? The minutes ticked by, and the question hung like a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening to burst. At 5:00 p.m. she sat up, brushing hair from her face. A swirl of apprehension and bravado warred in her chest. I have to decide, she told herself. Without overthinking, she grabbed her phone, tapped out a quick text. Are you sure about this? Give me a name or I'm not coming. She stared at the screen, waiting. Still, no response. The tension coiled tighter. She had no intention of going without more information, but the emptiness of the motel room made the choice harder. Trusting strangers almost got me in trouble before. And yet, 5:30, still no word. Olivia's leg bounced with nervous energy. Her instincts screamed caution, but a part of her clung to the possibility that this was an old friend or someone with real news about her past. You're not alone anymore, a voice reminded her. Richard could help if this is legit. But the notion of dragging him into it filled her with reluctance. She didn't want to be seen as a burden, someone constantly relying on him for rescue. With a sigh, she resolved to wait a bit longer. If no clearer communication arrived, she'd dismiss it. She had her new life to focus on. The job, a potential apartment hunt, possibly an evening shift soon. That was the future she wanted. Still, the clock ticked toward 6. And the unknown text hovered in her mind like a persistent echo. I need to talk to you. Urgent. Uncertainty weighed on her shoulders as the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the motel parking lot. If fate was testing her, she wasn't sure which choice spelled salvation and which spelled regret. At 5:45 p.m., the motel's aging air conditioner droned in the background as Olivia stared at her silent phone. No more texts, no hints of who had sent that message. She told herself it was reckless to even consider going. The rational side of her mind screamed, this is how people get lured into bad situations. And yet another part whispered, what if it's important? At 5:50, she sprang up from the bed, heart pounding. If they won't confirm who they are, I'm not going. Firm decision made, she began pacing around the small room, but 10 steps later, the tension knotted her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that she might be missing something, a chance to close a door on her past or maybe find an answer she hadn't known she was searching for. She checked the time again, 5:55. Her stomach roiled. If she left now, it would take her nearly 20 minutes to walk to the old bus station. She was already too late to arrive by 6. All for the best, she told herself, pressing a hand to her uneasy stomach. Let it go. Focus on tomorrow's shift. And then, as if conjured by her swirling anxieties, her phone vibrated. She snatched it up, pulse skittering. Another unknown text. Please come. I'm sorry for being vague. You'll understand when you see me. 6 p.m. is our last chance. Olivia's breath caught. The directness, the urgency, they wrapped around her like an invisible cord. It could be a trap, she reasoned, but the ache in her chest demanded an answer. She typed back, shaky fingers stumbling over the screen. I can't meet you if I don't know who you are. Within seconds came a reply. I'm Sierra. From the shelter last winter. I've learned something about your mother. Her heart lurched, eyes glued to those words. Sierra. Olivia vaguely remembered a thin, soft-spoken woman from the shelter who once shared a bunk bed with her for a week, maybe 2. But the mention of her mother? That sealed it. Her mother had passed away years ago, but if Sierra had found something, photos, documents, or maybe just a story to share. Olivia's determination crystallized. I need to see what she has to say. Without hesitation, she grabbed her hoodie, stuffed her phone and wallet in her pocket, and rushed out the motel room door, forgetting to even lock it. I'll only be gone a short while, she thought, bounding down the stairs 2 at a time. No reason to drag Richard into this, she insisted. It's my past, my choice. The sky, once bright, had dimmed to a murky twilight, and streetlights flickered on as she started her brisk walk. Clouds hovered overhead, threatening another drizzle. She followed backstreet shortcuts, navigating the city's lesser-traveled lanes. The old bus station sat on the outskirts, once a bustling hub, but now mostly abandoned since the newer terminal had opened across town. She arrived at 6:20, breathless and tense. The tall arches of the old station loomed like silent sentinels. Weeds cracked through the pavement, and graffiti sprawled across walls. A single lamp flickered in the entryway, revealing shattered windows and scattered debris inside. Olivia paused at the threshold, scanning the dim interior for any movement. The air felt cold, and her heart thumped. "Sierra?" she called, voice echoing off cracked tiles. No answer. She stepped cautiously into the station's cavernous main hall, where rows of battered metal benches sat under dangling fluorescent lights, most of them dead. Her footsteps echoed on the worn linoleum. "Over here," came a muffled voice from behind one of the old ticket counters. Olivia whipped her head around, spotting a slight figure. As she inched closer, a young woman emerged from the shadows. She wore a tattered coat and had her hood pulled low. But even in the dimness, Olivia recognized something in her eyes. The same guarded weariness that came with life on the streets. "Sierra?" Olivia asked, relief and apprehension colliding in her chest. The woman lowered her hood. She did look like the woman from the shelter, though thinner with lines of worry carved into her face. "Olivia? Oh my God," she breathed. "I was scared you wouldn't come." Olivia's gaze darted around, checking if they were truly alone. "You texted me out of nowhere," she said, voice tight. "Said you had something about my mother. She's gone. What could you possibly—" Sierra held up a trembling hand. Let me explain. I met a social worker who was going through old records from the time your mom was in and out of hospitals. She recognized your name, remember? We shared stories at the shelter, and she wanted to find you. She found me first, asked if I knew how to reach you." The mention of her mother's hospital stays sent a pang through Olivia. "What does she have?" Sierra hesitated, fumbling in her coat pocket. She withdrew a battered manila envelope. "This," She asked me to deliver it. She tried contacting you at the old addresses but never heard back. Her voice caught. I got worried if I mentioned it was about your mom, you might think it was a scam. Olivia's pulse raced, a swirl of conflicting emotions. She reached for the envelope, but Sierra clutched it to her chest, eyes flicking with guilt. I'm sorry. I also need your help. I'm in trouble, Olivia. A trickle of dread crawled up Olivia's spine. What kind of trouble? Sierra glanced around nervously. There's a guy. He calls himself JD. He hangs around the old shelter, controlling other homeless folks, exploiting them. If you owe him for anything, food, a place to crash, he demands payback. She swallowed. He's after me. I had to promise him I'd get him money, or else. I saw your mother's envelope as maybe a bargaining chip, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't betray you. Olivia's chest constricted, anger and sympathy flooding her. So you planned to lure me here? Sierra nodded miserably. Yes, at first. Then I realized you've had enough pain. I wanted to just hand it over, but JD found out. He's on his way. Panic flashed across her expression. I told him you might pay for it or something. I'm sorry, Olivia. I didn't know what else to do. The enormity of the betrayal and desperation in Sierra's eyes tore at Olivia. She'd been in dire straits before, too. She knew how desperation could warp moral lines. We have to leave, Olivia hissed, scanning the dim bus station. This place isn't safe. Sierra shook her head, tears welling up. JD's men are watching outside. I saw them. If they see me leave without giving him cash, I'm done for. A pulse of fear shot through Olivia. I should have told Richard, flitted across her mind, but she shoved it aside. This was her fight, her past. She squared her shoulders, taking Sierra's arm. We'll figure something out. Come on. They edged toward the side exit, the one that faced a back alley. But as soon as they neared it, a scuffling noise echoed in the corridor. 3 men blocked the doorway, their silhouettes framed by the dim glow from outside. The largest stepped forward, a bald man with scarred knuckles. Sierra, he growled, voice rasping. Thought you were meeting us at 6. You're late. Sierra tensed, pressing closer to Olivia. The man's gaze flicked to the envelope in Sierra's grip, then to Olivia's defiant stance. Ah, so this is your friend. She must be the one with the money, right? He sneered. Olivia's heart pounded, but she forced a level tone. We don't have money for you, she said. Sierra's done. She doesn't owe you anything. A harsh laugh erupted from the man's mouth. Yeah, that's not how it works, sweetheart. She owes us big time. The others closed in, cutting off any escape. Sierra whimpered, handing Olivia the envelope in a shaky motion. Take it, she whispered, tears brimming. Don't let him get it. Olivia gripped the envelope, protective instincts igniting. Back off, she warned, though her voice shook. She flicked her gaze around, searching for a gap, any route to flee. Or what? The man stepped closer. You'll call the cops? You'd be gone by the time they arrive. I know how you street rats operate. Olivia braced herself, adrenaline surging. We're leaving, she stated, voice stronger than she felt. Sierra's not your property. He smirked, the other 2 chuckling as if on cue. If you walk out that door, it'll cost you more than you have. A swirl of dread washed over her. She couldn't handle 3 men alone. At that very moment, a jarring buzz jolted her phone in her hoodie pocket. On instinct, she reached for it, expecting maybe a text from Richard or even a spam call. The lead thug, misinterpreting her movement, lunged forward, grabbing her wrist in a vice-like grip. He snarled. No phone calls. She winced, dropping the phone, which clattered to the floor. The screen lit up. Incoming call from Richard. Her pulse soared. He must be checking in. But JD's man twisted her arm and she yelped in pain. Suddenly footsteps pounded from the main hall. A figure appeared, a swirl of movement in the shadows. Olivia's vision flickered over the standoff. For a heartbeat, she thought it was an ordinary bystander. But then the figure lunged at the thug restraining her. A swift punch crashed into the man's jaw, staggering him. "Don't touch her!" came a furious voice. Richard. He advanced, fists clenched, face taut with anger. Another thug stepped forward, swinging at him, but Richard ducked and struck back. He wasn't trained, but adrenaline fueled him. The blow connected with the thug's ribs, sending him reeling. It all happened in seconds. Sierra shrieked, retreating behind a crumbling ticket booth. The third man tried grabbing Richard from behind, but Olivia, wresting free from the lead thug's grip, kicked out at the attacker's shin. He stumbled, giving Richard a chance to elbow him away. The lead thug roared in frustration, staggering from the initial hit. He regrouped quickly, eyes blazing with violent intent. Olivia braced for a second assault, but the echo of sirens suddenly cut through the station's stale air. Was that the police? The men froze, exchanging panicked looks. "You called the cops?" the leader spat, lip curling. He realized the fight was turning against him, especially with sirens getting closer. Richard steadied himself, panting, gaze locked on the men. "You heard them," he said, breathing ragged. "You want to end this here, or keep going?" Glaring, the lead thug gestured to the other two. They backed away, cursing under their breath. "This ain't over," he growled, fixing his eyes on Sierra. Then they darted through the side exit into the gloom. Adrenaline still coursed through Olivia as she realized the sirens weren't actually drawing nearer. Possibly just an ambulance passing nearby. She inhaled sharply, entire body shaking. "We got lucky." She turned to find Richard stooped, catching his breath, knuckles red from the punches thrown. "How did you—" she started, voice trembling. He straightened, meeting her gaze. "I tried calling. You didn't pick up. I got worried," he explained, chest heaving. "Check the location-sharing app we set up on your phone's last software update. Remember you asked me to install something to track it if you lost it? I saw you heading out of the motel alone to the bus station. He paused, voice wavering. "I was concerned. I came as fast as I could." Her mind spun. "I forgot about that tracking feature." She'd asked him to set it up in case her phone got stolen. She hadn't even considered he might check it to see if she was safe. She pressed her lips together, tears burning in her eyes. "Richard, thank you." They were both trembling. He drew her into a tight embrace, relief cascading over them. She let out a choked sob, gripping him as the tension of the last minutes released. Sierra sidled closer, hugging the manila envelope to her chest. She looked terrified but unharmed. After a beat, Richard pulled back, scanning Olivia's face. "You're okay?" he asked, softly brushing hair from her eyes. She managed a nod, tears still threatening to spill. A hush fell as Sierra cleared her throat. I'm sorry," she repeated, voice quivering. "I didn't want anyone hurt." Olivia and Richard both looked at her. Olivia spoke first, more gently now. "Are you safe to leave here? Because you can't stay. They'll come back." Sierra dipped her head. I don't know. I have nowhere to go." She clutched the envelope. "But I had to get this to you." Warily, she extended the packet. Olivia took it, heart pounding. Richard glanced around on high alert. "We should go, now." Without further argument, they moved as a unit, sticking to the shadows until they reached the main entrance. The street outside was quiet, no sign of JD's men. Tension remained in their posture as they hurried away from the station. In the distance, neon lights flickered to life on old storefronts, and a half-moon emerged behind drifting clouds. Sierra hesitated on a corner, uncertain. "They'll come after me," she whispered, eyes hollow. "I can't ask you to help me, but—" Richard met Olivia's gaze. "We can't just leave her here," his expression said. Olivia felt that same conviction overshadowing her fear. "Come with us," she told Sierra, summoning a calm she didn't fully feel. "We'll figure out something." Sierra's eyes lit with fragile hope. "Really? You'd do that?" Richard gave a firm nod. Yes. We'll get you a place to stay. Maybe the Maple Inn for a night or two. We'll talk to Gus. Maybe he needs more help, or we'll find another safe spot. But first, let's get out of here. They hurried down a few blocks, finally managing to hail a passing taxi. Piling into the back seat, hearts pounding, they collectively exhaled once the city lights blurred past the windows in relative safety. Olivia sat sandwiched between Sierra and Richard, the envelope pressed protectively against her chest. No one spoke until they were halfway to the motel. Finally, Olivia dared ask, "Sierra, what's inside?" Sierra sniffled, wiping her eyes. "Medical files, a letter from a doctor who treated your mom near the end, and some pictures you probably never saw. She tried to keep them for you." The weight of heartbreak and gratitude pressed on Olivia's chest. "Thank you," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. She felt Richard's hand briefly squeeze hers. They reached the Maple Inn, stepping from the taxi onto the asphalt that glowed under buzzing overhead lights. Once inside Olivia's room, 214, a hush enveloped them. Sierra perched on a chair, still trembling, while Olivia and Richard stood near the bed. In the warmth of the small lamp's glow, Olivia carefully opened the envelope. Her eyes misted as she pulled out worn Polaroids showing her mother smiling on a hospital bed, scrawled notes on the backs about her hopes for Olivia's future. Then the letter from a doctor, explaining how her mother's condition had been advanced but praising her resilience. There were also a few scribbled lines from her mom, a final message of love and apology that she couldn't protect Olivia from the harsh realities of the world. Silent tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks as she read, "My daughter, you have so much strength inside you. Don't be afraid to let others care for you." The final sentence seared into her heart. She pressed the letter to her chest, sobs threatening to break forth. Richard gently laid a hand on her shoulder. She turned to him, voice shaky. "I'd have never known. She really tried everything." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm so sorry you lost her." Sierra stared at the floor. "I wanted you to have that, Olivia. That's all. I'm so sorry for dragging you into that mess with JD." Olivia wiped her eyes. She swallowed, determined to handle this with compassion. "It's done," she murmured, stepping forward to place a hand on Sierra's. "We'll figure out how to keep you safe, too." Richard cleared his throat, still tense from the confrontation at the station. "I can pay for a room here or somewhere else until we figure out something better. We can't just leave you to face those thugs alone." Sierra blinked through tears, nodding gratefully, relief etched in her face. Exhaustion settled over them like a heavy blanket. No one had the energy for big decisions that night. They arranged for Sierra to take room 216 right next door, so she wouldn't wander back into danger. While Richard handled the motel paperwork, Olivia tidied her own room. She felt an odd sense of déjà vu. Just days ago, she'd been the one receiving help in a time of fear. Now she was paying it forward. Finally, the chaos subsided. Sierra retreated to her newly assigned room, promising she'd lock the door. Richard lingered in Olivia's doorway, uncertain. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She held the envelope to her chest, nodding. Raw emotion played across her face. I have closure, in a way, and I have you to thank for helping me tonight." His gaze was gentle. "I just showed up at the right time." She let out a shaky laugh. "The perfect time," she corrected, voice thick with gratitude. Her mother's words rang in her mind. "Don't be afraid to let others care for you." She took a breath, stepping forward. "I know I'm not used to leaning on people, but I'm glad you're here, Richard." A tender silence followed. She dared to close the distance, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. His arms folded around her, warm and steady. For a moment, they stood there, the battered motel walls and flickering light overhead fading into the background. At last, they pulled apart, each bearing a quietly determined look. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, dealing with Sierra's safety, facing the potential wrath of JD, continuing her new job. But in that moment, they both recognized something essential. They were no longer fighting battles alone. With a final, gentle smile, Richard bid her good night, leaving her to the privacy of her thoughts. Alone in room 214, Olivia carefully laid out the Polaroids and letters on the bedspread, tears of both grief and relief threading down her cheeks. She felt closer to her mother than she had in years, and the fragile new life she was building no longer seemed so precarious. In the corridor, the faint sound of Richard's footsteps retreated, echoing a silent promise. He would come when she called, and she would no longer face the darkness of her past without support. Outside, the motel sign buzzed, painting the parking lot with neon reflections. And above them, clouds drifted past the moon, the city's lullaby carrying them into a night of well-earned rest. Tomorrow, they'd wake to a world still brimming with threats and unknowns, but with hope shining brighter than ever. The heartbreak of Valentine's Day had morphed into an unexpected alliance, forging a bond between two souls once isolated by pain and circumstance. And with each small step forward, like the final notes of a lullaby, the promise of better days rang ever clearer, echoing through the narrow halls of that modest motel and deep into Olivia's resolute heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen